Well, let's discuss all of this further. We're joined by retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, who comes to us via Skype from LA, and CNN political commentator Mark Hill, who's also with us via Skype from Philadelphia. Welcome to you both. Cheryl, let me start with you. So, as we just heard there in that report, state and federal officials deciding not to file charges against those two officers in the shooting of Alton Sterling, saying their actions were justified. Then days later, police say Officer Salamone violated use of force policies. The contradiction does not make sense to many people. Does it make sense to you?
No, it doesn't. And listen, he doesn't get credit for something that he did not know, which was that Alton Sterling did in fact have a gun. He didn't know whether or not he had a gun when he was yelling at him, when he was cursing him out, when he was threatening to shoot his effing head off. He was punishing Mr. Sterling because he could. He was abusing his authority, and then he made good on that threat. He executed this man because he wasn't following his orders, and police officers are not trained to do that. Thus, he was fired. My concern is that he'll, in 2 weeks, like Betty Shelby, go get a job in a neighboring police agency and do the same thing again. He's learned nothing until he's convicted.
Mark, to bring you in, Cheryl lays out some of the actions that we saw there in that video. As we said, 4 videos have been released in recent days, and we see Salamone shouting profanities at Sterling. We see him slamming him into the car, twice ordering the second officer to tase him, threatening to shoot Sterling. We see him holding that gun at his head. And yet, to go back to that point, federal and state officials declined to bring charges against officers. What does this say to you about the path towards achieving justice, holding police accountable when it comes to the shooting deaths of unarmed black and brown men?
That it's nearly impossible to get justice from the criminal justice system when it comes to law enforcement. Essentially, you're asking the police when it comes to internal affairs to police themselves, and they almost never find police officers guilty. If it goes to a grand jury or if it's in the prosecutor's hands, prosecutors rarely want to charge police officers for killing civilians. It is very difficult to convict. Even if it makes it to a trial, it is very difficult for jurors to convict police officers, even when there's videotape, even when there's incontrovertible evidence, as we've seen with Walter Scott in South Carolina, as we've seen in other cases. It's very, very difficult to do that. And so ultimately the message that gets sent is that black and brown bodies simply aren't worth as much as others when it comes to law enforcement.
And Cheryl, to pick up on what Mark just said, I mean, according to that 2016 Department of Justice report on the Sterling killing, it took less than 90 seconds from the moment Officer Lake first approached Sterling to the firing of the final shot. In the case of Stephon Clark, who was shot most recently in Sacramento in his grandmother's backyard, officers mistook a cell phone for a gun, directed 20 shots at him. 6 struck him in the back, 1 in the neck, the other in the thigh. Again, it comes back to this question. When we're looking at police here in the U.S., are we looking at a case of shoot first, ask questions later when it comes to black and brown men?
Absolutely. We're looking at a case of shoot first and then create a scenario, manufacture probable cause, reasonable suspicion, create fear after the fact to justify and substantiate that shooting that should have never occurred. In the case of Stephon Clark, those officers were in a position of cover and concealment around the house. They had the benefit of an air unit overhead, which he could not outrun. So there was absolutely no reason for them to engage, certainly in deadly force, and especially 20 rounds. It was excessive. Officers are trained to fire 2 rounds, generally, reassess the threat, and make a determination whether or not more rounds are required. And clearly that wasn't done. This was an execution of this young man.
Mark, the killing of Stephon Clark was put to the White House Press Secretary, Sarah Sanders. She said it's a local matter. What does that say to you about this administration and its level of interest in any kind of national dialogue when it comes to community policing, police reform, criminal justice reform? Has that ship sailed?
That ship sailed a long time ago. I mean, under the Obama administration, there were many times where we didn't have sufficient dialogue, national dialogue, about these sorts of matters. I would have loved for President Obama to have weighed in more. But he is a civil rights freedom fighter in comparison to what we've seen during the Trump administration. I mean, to call this a local matter is accurate if it were in isolation. The problem is that this is not only a single instance, it is rather one sign of a much bigger problem. Every week, every month, we're seeing these types of cases. It's a national epidemic, and it's something that the president can speak to in the same way that he speaks to a school shooting. I mean, I could call a school shooting a local matter, but we don't, because one, it's a national tragedy when white people die, and two, because it's clearly connected to a bigger problem. That same larger problem is the case when it comes to Stephon Clark, Alton Sterling, Sean Bell, Trayvon Martin. We can go on down the list. And so it's necessary for the Trump administration to speak to this, and by ignoring it, he's denying the role of law enforcement and the politicians, not just locally but nationally, and creating not just a dialogue but a different state of affairs and a different set of standards for police officers to adhere to, so that this doesn't continue to happen.
Cheryl Dorsey, Mark Lamont Hill, my thanks to you both for the honest conversation. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.